Welcome to the Dan Norton Show. It is Saturday, May 24th, 2025, and this is live stream number 25. Just did a quick audio check, and it looks like the audio is working. Just gotta get rid of an echo here. Okay, I think that's got that. All right, so um, looks like we already got one chat from Darwin. He says he wants to talk about public funding of science as well as the benefits of government regulation. Okay, I think we can do that. I guess you want to call in. I haven't put the number in the chat. I need to do that. Let me just give me a minute to put that in the chat. I can do text chat or calls. I like to have both options available, but I was a little busy before I was starting the stream, so I didn't have time to put the call instructions in the chat yet. So let me just give me a minute to do that. And they're going to be a little bit different this time because I have a new phone number for screening calls. So that's a way to screen out unwanted callers, trolls, which have been a bit of a problem in recent shows. So I thought it would be good to use a call screening number in addition to the regular Zoom call number. So I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to do this, but if you're someone like Darwin, who I've already had calls with, and he's established himself as a legitimate chatter, or if you're like Megan, who's called in before, and that's been fine. You don't have to be screened necessarily. You can just call the normal number. But if you're a completely new person who I don't know at all, then I might want to do a screening call with you first. Uh, maybe that and or screen you through YouTube chats. But I think I want to do some kind of screening process for people who are completely new. And exactly what that process is will be determined going forward, but um, it could involve some call screening or screening through YouTube chat or Zoom chat. That's another possibility. Okay, so let me just paste this link. Okay, just put in my default text. Now I have to copy the link that is specific to today's Zoom meeting. Okay, got that. Okay, now to have this call instruction fit entirely within one chat message, which would be nice, I think I'm going to have to make some modifications. Okay, I think I'm going to see normally it says to call the show, click this link, and then I give the Zoom link. But instead of the part that says to call the show, click this link, I'm just going to write Zoom link. That's shorter, saves me some characters, which gives me space to put in the call screening number. Let me say, now I got to find that number. I need a minute to do that. So this should all be smoother, quicker going forward. But this is my first time doing this sort of setup with the call screening number. So, and I didn't have time to do this before the show started, so it's taking me a little longer this time, but should go smoother in the future. By the way, if you are here and if you enjoy my stream, I definitely like it when you give it a like. That'll help promote it in the algorithm. Maybe get some more people to see it and come by. Okay, I just found the call screening number. Okay, that is pasted. Let's see if I have enough characters left to say call screen number. Yeah, exactly. Okay. So now it says call screen number, Zoom link, or dial by phone. See, there's two separate phone numbers. There's one for Zoom calls, and then there's one for call screening. So I think I might want to reword this a bit to make it more clear which number is which. Well, I think people could figure it out without too much effort. I'm just going to say, or call Zoom. You'll be able to see what I'm drafting here in just a few seconds. Call screen number, Zoom link, or call Zoom. Okay, I'm just going to go with that. Okay, I have pinned the new call instructions in the chat. So for anyone who wants to call in, just look at those. And let me read it out for anyone who's only listening and not looking at the chat. So the call screen number, if you're a first-time caller or I have no idea who you are, you'll probably need to be screened. I guess maybe I could screen you through the YouTube chat or the Zoom chats, but I might decide to screen you through a call. And I think the way that would work is you call this number and I would just screen you during the show. I don't have a separate person who's screening my calls. I just do it all myself. So you would call the call screening number and then I would chat with you a little bit. And while I'm doing that, the people listening on YouTube would only hear my side of the conversation. I guess I could turn off my mic so they don't hear either side of the conversation, but I think it might be better if they can at least hear my side of the conversation. So the call screening number is 657 233 0878. And one more time, 657 233 0878. And if you want to call in on Zoom, if you're someone like Darwin, who I've spoken with before, and I don't need to screen him because he's already established himself as a legitimate caller, not a troll, then there's just a Zoom link there you can click on, and that'll get you into the Zoom waiting room. If you want to just dial in by phone to Zoom instead of clicking on this web link, there is a Zoom phone number you can also call, which is 669 444 9171. 669 444 9171. And then you will be prompted to enter a Zoom meeting ID, which is 854 5978 1722 pound. And then you will have to press pound again to get into the Zoom waiting room. So those are the call instructions, and I've pinned them in the chat on YouTube. All right, so let me see in my notes if there's anything else I wanted to mention before I get to Darwin's call. Hold on a minute. Okay. Let's see. Where's my? Okay. Here's my list of notes. Okay. So I have a few things which I could talk about, but I could also talk about them later. I don't have to do them at the beginning here, uh, or ever. I guess some of this material is just stuff I could talk about in case no one's calling in or engaging in the chat. I'm primarily here to engage with people, so I want to give priority to that. But I guess if I need a break from that or something, then I have some other material I could talk about. But I don't think I need to discuss any of that right now. It's not urgent. Okay. Well, I think I'm going to take Darwin's call then. So let me see if I can. Okay. Yeah, I see him in the Zoom waiting room. And let me just I want to take a quick look at my analytics um, before I hit admit. I like to see how many people have come by this stream. Okay. All right. Looks good. So let me. Okay. All right. I'm going to pull Darwin in. Oh, I have to remember. I just want to get in the habit here. I have to set it up so that when someone comes on the call, they don't have their video or audio turned on. Not that I have a problem with Darwin with that sort of thing, but I just want to get in the habit of doing this for each caller so I don't forget. So Darwin is not going to be able to talk or show video. Not that I think he can, because I think he's calling in on a phone line instead of um, through the web. But I'm going to have to ask him to unmute instead of him unmuting himself. And then I think, Darwin, you're going to have to hit *6 um, to unmute yourself. Well, we'll do a little experiment here. But I think at a certain point, after I hit ask to unmute, it's going to tell you need to hit *6 on your phone to unmute. So let's see if that's what happens. Okay, admits.
Hey, can you hear me?
Oh yeah, that was interesting. It didn't ask me to. Maybe that's because you're calling in on a phone. It didn't start out with you muted, and then I have to hit the ask you to unmute button. But I think maybe if you're calling in through the web, it would. Anyways, not a big, we don't have to try to figure that out now. But anyways, welcome back to the show, Darwin.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'll leave it up to you. Do you want to talk about publicly funding science or about regulations first?
Let's see. I'm just looking back at your chat. Yeah, you said you want to talk about public funding of science, which came up briefly in the last live stream. I think you mentioned at the end something about NHS and as funding CRISPR. And then, so public funding of science and then regulations. Those are the two topics. How about let's start with regulation and then see where that goes.
Okay. So I would argue that regulations, especially workplace regulations, are a good thing. So do you know about the beginning of the labor movement in the United States and the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire?
I know a little about that. I read about that on Wikipedia, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, but it's been, I don't know, a couple years or something. So I have at least a vague memory of that, but I don't remember it very well. But we can talk about that or however you want to get into it.
Yeah, sure. So just very briefly, it was in 1911, and it was the largest workplace catastrophe in the U.S. before 9/11. And 146 garment workers were killed, mostly young immigrant women. And that's because the factory owners locked the elevator doors, and there wasn't enough. Basically, the fire escapes weren't long enough because the fire started on the 8th floor for them to exit the building on time. So a lot of them died of smoke inhalation. A lot of them died jumping from the building because there were no regulations in place to protect them.
Okay. Yeah, that's you're refreshing my memory on some of the details about it. So, I guess there are so this is it's a common idea that like elevators are going to break if we don't have elevator regulators or something. And that would just be another concrete example. But I think there are self-interested reasons to have certain safety measures in place. Like it's not going to be good for your reputation as a business if you do things that kill your customers or that are very dangerous for your customers. So I don't think it's the case that we need to have government regulators to incentivize safe behavior. I think that the free market will weed out people who are not good about that. And there are certain things where maybe you could just sue a business or prosecute a business if they violate certain laws that are already on the books. Like if you shoot your employees or something because they're not doing well. Well, there's already laws on the books against murder. So you could take someone to court, an employer to court, if he did something that's like that. I don't know what kind of laws there were at the time or should have been at the time to deal with this particular case of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. So I don't know if there were any laws violated or maybe just laws weren't in place yet. Certain things like to deal with new situations like the internet when that first came onto the scene, maybe there's a lag between the time when the technology gets started and then the laws that govern that technology. Um, so there might be a lag time, and I don't know if that was an issue at all with this factory. But anyways,
Yeah.
I
So
do think there are free
yeah.
market ways of dealing with these sorts of situations.
Mhm. Yeah. So the issue is that after the disaster, there was between 1911 and 1913 around 38 new state laws to mandate outward opening doors, fire drills, sprinkler systems, sanitation, and limits on women's and children's work. So the laws simply weren't in place. So they weren't necessarily, I mean, they were violating a few laws, but not as many as would benefit the workers. And also, when you say that there would be like the free market would weed out the bad people or the bad employers, that weeding out process, I mean, it will kill people. So, like, I guess in the free market system where there's no regulation, this disaster would have happened where 146 young people would have died, and that would have been part of the seeding process for better workplace environments in the free market. So I don't necessarily agree that that's the best of all worlds, that these workplace disasters have to die to galvanize better conditions.
I do think there's I don't know that people have to die for it to happen. Like maybe these people were negligent, the people running the factory, or maybe I don't know if there's any um, responsibility on the part of the workers. I don't know if they said anything about, hey, you need to open the doors and keep them open, or I don't know if this is entirely. I don't know whose fault it was. Like I don't know enough about the details of this. You said they locked the people in there? Is this like a
Yeah, so
normal thing? Like every day they did
the
this, or just
elevators
on the
were
day there
locked,
was a
and
fire?
they would regularly do this to avoid workers going on break. So they locked the elevators, and also the fire escape didn't go. It didn't reach down far enough. I don't even know if there was a fire escape actually, because like in the documentary, they saw, you could see the firefighters come, and then the ladder could only reach around the 6th floor, and most of the workers were on the 8th and 9th floors. Yeah, but a lot of these laws weren't even in place. So I think regulations are good. Like, we just can't leave it to the free market to decide the fates of people. There has to be fire safety in place. So I don't imagine in like your scenario, like, when is the free market going to kick in and prevent these people from being killed? Like, in both scenarios, the people are killed. But in my scenario, is you provide regulation and then it prevents it from happening. And then in your scenario, there's some type of competition lag time for the best employer to get out on top. And how many people die in the interim?
Okay, I'm just taking some notes here. You cut out for a few fractions of a second, but I think I got the gist of what you're saying. So one thing that came to mind is um, if I'm working in this place and I know that they lock the doors, that's their standard procedure, then I might think, and you said they did this to stop them from taking breaks when they're not supposed to or
Hmm.
something.
Yeah.
I think if I'm working at a place like that, I might quit. I might say, well, look, what if there's yeah, I know I'm only supposed to take a break at certain times, but what if there's a fire and I need to get out, whether it's the official break time or any other time, it seems reasonable to think at any moment there might be an emergency, like a fire. So the doors have to stay unlocked at all times. And if I know that they are locking people in, I might quit at that point. Maybe I would, I don't know if I would try to report this business to the authorities, the police or something. But that already, I'm thinking maybe there's some responsibility on the part of the people who are working there as to the kinds of conditions they should insist upon if they're going to work there at all. So that's one thing. But another issue is, um, I'll put it this way: who regulates the regulators? So there's no benevolent government or a government that we can count on to be better than the people that are being governed or controlled by the law. So it's not a magic solution. I don't know if that's the right way to put it. I don't want to be like rude or sarcastic, but just having a government regulation in place doesn't necessarily fix a problem because what's to guarantee that the people who are enforcing the law, the regulators, are going to be good people? And then do we need regulators to regulate the regulators of the regulators? There's like an infinite chain. Um, so, and also another thought I had was like just innocent people or innocent until proven guilty. Like, should we put someone on you to regulate you because, hey, there's a chance that you might go rob a store today, or you might go out and kill someone today. So should we put some government agent on you and follow you around your whole life because maybe it's possible that you will do something bad, and we don't want to have to deal with it after the fact because it's too late then, right? So we just have to put a government agent on everybody in advance, just in case maybe they do something wrong. Well, that's treating people as guilty until proven innocent, and um, I don't think that's conducive to a free society, a happy society where people are going to want to live and prosper. I think if people know that their reputations are on the line, that is an incentive to engage in good behavior. And not everyone is going to be good. I mean, there's no guarantee that people are always going to be good, but I do think it makes for a better uh, system. I think it's more respecting of people's rights and of the idea that people are innocent until proven guilty, to wait until there's some evidence that they're doing something wrong, instead of treating them as a criminal in advance and then forcing them to act in this way or that, because maybe they will do something wrong. So there's some thoughts.
Yeah. So to address your first point about personal responsibility. Most of these women were between the ages of 14 and 23 and didn't speak English. They spoke Yiddish and Italian. And so the prospects of work, they couldn't just quit and find another job. The system was rigged against them. And then secondly, they had very limited agency back in the day to form unions because the factory owners would frequently hire private corporations to come and bust up strikes. So I don't know if you know about the Pinkertons, but they would constantly break up railroad strikes around this time in the United States by basically beating the hell out of people with a billy club. And then, as you said, like your second thing was you're worried about who's going to regulate the regulators. Well, I don't think it's that unreasonable to have unlocked elevators, fire escapes, and sprinkler systems. I think that's the bare minimum, and I don't think that impinges on anybody's freedom. In fact, I think people would feel more free if they felt like they were going to die in their workplace to begin with.
Okay. All right. Just for anyone who's joining, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here. We are doing a call with Darwin, who is from the Majority Report, or at least that's how he found out about me. The Majority Report with Sam Cedar. That's a show by a leftist, and I've called into that show several times, and a lot of people have found out about me through there, including Darwin. So that's the perspective Darwin is coming from. And I'm happy to have him on here for a civil debate. Let me just take a... Oh, we got a new subscriber. Great. Yeah, I definitely appreciate getting new subscribers. So thanks for doing that. I want to get up to 1,000. Then I can apply to have my channel monetized, which will be great. I see someone else is here in the super chat. It looks like a new person. I don't know how to pronounce this. XYZ Zush, Zajush, maybe I'll say it like that. And he's asking, he says, so I titled the show today, I am pro reason, egoism, and capitalism. I'm anti faith, altruism, and socialism. So I think that's what triggered this first comment from Zizush. Oh, he says, just call me Marx. Okay. And he asks where. Okay, so maybe I will engage here some with Zizish later, but I just wanted to take a quick look at the chat right now to see what's going on, and then I want to come back to Darwin and continue this conversation with him. But I do want to engage more with the chat, certainly if there aren't any more callers. So feel free to call in also yourself if you want to be on the show. I don't have a strict schedule on exactly how much time I spend on a given call or with the chat. It just kind of depends on how things are going. And of course, it could just be a troll calling in, so I don't necessarily want to take the call. Maybe I can screen that call out and then come back to Darwin or whoever the current caller is if they want to hang on. But do feel free to call in at any time, and I will at least acknowledge you. And then maybe eventually get to your call. Glad to see we have 10 viewers, it says, on my end, and we got 5 likes. Great. Keep it going. Let's keep it going. All right, so let me get back to what Darwin was saying. So he was saying that the first point he made was that the workers in the factory, the Shirtwaist Factory, were like 14 to 23-year-old women. I guess maybe they were immigrants who didn't speak English, and they can't really quit and find another job. So first of all, I don't know that that's the case, that they couldn't quit and find another job. I don't see why that would be the case. If you have a free market system, I think it's very easy to find alternative work. There's no one, or just starting your own business. You could go out on a street corner and sell hot dogs or flowers. You could go around with a shovel and volunteer, knock on people's doors, volunteer to shovel their snow out of their driveway or rake rake their lawns. There's just so many opportunities, like endless opportunities, if you have a free market of ways to make money. If you don't have rules like minimum wage, which force people to not hire you except for a certain amount, if you're free to charge whatever amount you want for your labor, I think it's much easier for you to find a job and become self-sustaining. So I think if we had a free market, it would not be a problem for anyone to find a job and support themselves. I mean, a lot of these people, they're immigrating from Europe uh, for the greater opportunity and freedom that exists in the United States. And even at this time, 1911, I think it was much freer in terms of the sort of economic opportunities that people had. There wasn't massive regulation and taxation, or at least not nearly to the extent that it exists today. But even then, I think there were some regulations in place, like there were antitrust laws starting in 1890, I believe, with the Sherman Antitrust Act. There were laws, and there was some kind of government interference in the railroad industry with subsidies. So there were various kinds of interventions of the governments from the beginning of the country. Um, and it's never been a purely free market, but I think it was much more free at that time. But in any case, I don't think it's true that there, in a truly free market, someone wouldn't be able to find some kind of work to support themselves. I mean, you could support yourself on a desert island, right, by yourself. So if you can do that, certainly, I think it should be even easier to find some way to support yourself in a society of millions of people who are looking for good opportunities to hire people. So I don't think that would be a problem.
Yeah,
Now,
but I mean, the
you also
early
mentioned the unions, the Pinkertons, but maybe instead of going there, we can dig in more deeply on this point since it sounds like you want to say something now. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I'm just like the early 20th century wasn't like a utopian free market. I mean, there was tremendous amounts of discrimination against Italian and Jewish immigrants. So they definitely could not just pick up and get a job anywhere in New York City, at least.
Okay. I don't know about that. So I haven't read much about that era of history. Lately, I've been focused more on reading the history of Israel, actually, the period of the British mandates or when it was getting started around 1920. I bounce around sometimes. I was also
Hmm.
reading about medieval England a month or so ago. Um, so I don't take anyone's word at face value until I've investigated it myself, because in my experience, people have often made claims about the history of capitalism, which I think turn out not to be true. When I look into them more or read about them, Ayn Rand has a book called Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal, which talks about the history of capitalism and deals with a lot of the myths, like the idea that capitalism caused the Great Depression, for example. Um, but I don't see why it would be the case that these people, because they were immigrants, wouldn't be able to find alternative work. You said they,
So
uh,
do you know about
go ahead.
Sacco and Vanzetti?
The names ring a bell, but I can't remember what they were famous for.
So they were Italian immigrants who were lynched in the streets. So you like I'm not saying it's a consequence of capitalism at all. I'm just saying that there's abundant evidence for anti-Italian and anti-Jewish discrimination at this time in the United States, at least.
Oh yeah, sure, sure. And I think that's bad. That's a bad part of the U.S. history, but I think that's an anti-capitalist part. I think capitalism is pro-individualism, treating people as individuals, not as members of some collective. Like you're Italian or you're Jewish, and so we're going to discriminate against you and be rude or worse, and lynch you, kill you. I think that's a very anti-capitalist sort of mindset. That's a very kind of tribal
Sure, but
collectivist mindset.
yeah, what I'm saying is that this all happened in a milieu where there was no regulation.
Well, there are laws against lynching. I mean, you're not allowed to murder
Yeah, there are
people. So
law.
you're talking about people murdering Italians or something. That's already banned by the basic laws of the country. So the
No, so
basic principle is initiation of force. You can't do that. And that's murdering
that was a
someone is
broader point
definitely.
about discrimination. I'm saying that in the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, you had these group of vulnerable people. Most of them would be considered children in our age, working for very low wages in terrible working conditions without regulation. That was the broader point I'm making.
Okay, well, I mean, what counts as terrible working conditions, I think, is somewhat relative. I mean, if you're
I
coming
think
out
I
of
think
the
146 people dying in a fire would be considered bad working conditions,
Oh no, I'm
if
not
I
talking
had to
about that. I'm
say.
talking about the general, like on a day when there's not a fire, like sweatshops. People often decry that and say, that there shouldn't even be sweatshops. We're not talking about a specific, disaster like a fire. Just people shouldn't even be subject to this at all. They're like wage slaves. They will be called, and this is like some kind of illegitimate job. And I don't think that's correct. But that's a different issue than a emergency disaster. So I mean,
I mean,
we've talked some about like the attitude someone could have towards this sort of position if these immigrants knew they were being locked and also know that there's a chance that some fire could break out and they're going to lose their lives. Well, I think if I'm one of those immigrants, I'm going to quit that job and look for other work. And if there's a free market, I think I will be able to find other work. Certainly work better than working in a factory where I'm locked in and there's the risk of being killed due to a fire.
so I agree that if they lived in that utopia where there was a lot of fluidity in the market, and they could quit and join any other working location, and that jobs are fungible, that would be true. But that's not how New York City worked in 1911.
All right. Well, I mean, I don't know the details on New York City in 1911, but I'm here to what I want to defend is laissez-faire capitalism. So, if New York City in 1911 was not perfectly laissez-faire capitalist, and I'm sure it was not, then well, okay. But I'm not defending that. I'm defending the what you called utopian, but I think it's possible. So, I think it's ideal. That's what I'm here to defend in a certain sort of system, not necessarily the one that existed at a given time in history. But I think
Yeah,
the
I think
closer systems
laissez.
have gotten to that in history, the better they have done.
So I have a counterfactual for that. May I? It's going
Yeah.
to be a change in topic slightly.
Okay.
So laissez-faire capitalism led to the Irish potato famine. So the famine is a bit of a misnomer. It was more of a hunger. So during that period of time where a million Irish starved and another million left in the diaspora, there was actually a net export of food from the island, just because free market forces allowed the grain growers to ship it elsewhere to the UK, to Scotland, to England, as opposed to feed the domestic workers who were reliant on potatoes.
Okay. So here's another era of history which I don't know much about. But what I can say is I would not agree that laissez-faire capitalism led to something that you're describing, a famine, because laissez-faire capitalism has never existed. Not to my knowledge. I mean, systems have gotten closer or further from it, but we can't call it laissez-faire capitalism unless there's been a complete abolition of the initiation of force, which to my knowledge there has never been. Now, maybe you could you can sort of like you can round numbers to the nearest number. Like we could say round up 99 to 100 if we want to take a certain perspective. Now, maybe you could, so to speak, you could round a system and say, well, this system was laissez-faire capitalist. If we're rounding, maybe you would want to say that about like late 19th century America. But even that, I doubt it. I think Ayn Rand called that a mixed economy. I don't think it was as mixed as it is now, or at least the proportion of the mixture between freedom and coercion was much more on the side of freedom, at least in certain realms. Maybe not in racial areas like you had Jim Crow laws in the South, but in terms of economic freedoms, I think it was more heavily weighted on the side of freedom as opposed to coercion.
So the
Um,
colonial administrator of Ireland during the famine, his name is Charles Trevelyan, you can look him up, wrote extensively about laissez-faire economics and his economic philosophy. So, I mean, it's It's
Okay.
he was well known. He was a well-known proponent of laissez-faire economics.
Okay. Well, I mean,
But
you can be a
we can put
proponent
that
of
we
a
can put that
system.
aside because you can, yeah.
Yeah, you can be a proponent of a system, and it also be true that you're not living in that sort of system. Like I'm a proponent of laissez-faire capitalism, but I'm not living in a society of laissez-faire capitalism. I mean, it depends on what all the policies are that govern the particular society. And but I don't think, I mean, I don't think in a free market there would be a reason for people to starve. I mean, there would be a huge demand for potatoes or some kind of food if you're a malnourished population. So, and you can make a tremendous profit by feeding all these people because, you know, they want to, nobody wants to starve unless you want to kill yourself, which is almost nobody. So I don't see why capitalism would lead to famine.
So what I'm saying is that, like, if the person in charge, the colonial administrator, has a propensity towards laissez-faire economics and he's pushing economic systems in that direction, and the direction, and then you see, you know, net export of grain. I'm saying that laissez-faire directionally didn't help, even if it wasn't, even if it weren't a free market. But you can look up the potato famine later. That's a little too far afield of where I want to go with this conversation. I just want to, can I bring up one last topic and then I'll let somebody else come on the line?
Yeah, but I don't see anyone else who's in the waiting room, so there's no one else coming after you. But feel free to, yeah,
All
bring
right.
up
Well,
whatever topic.
yeah. So talking about regulation, let's move a bit away from government regulation and more towards environmental regulation. So do you know what the Montreal Protocol was?
No.
So because of the use of refrigerants, I think they're called CFCs, like chlorofluorocarbons.
Hmm.
Those damage the ozone layer. And it was found that in the 70s and 80s, there was a growing hole in the ozone, and it was projected to lead to more skin cancer and cataracts because of more UVA radiation leaking in. So collectively, a lot of countries came together and they created regulations for the use of CFCs. And within decades, the atmospheric CFC level plummeted. There was about a 99% reduction. And then you saw an attendant, like, reforming of the ozone layer. So I would say that was a pretty good form of regulation.
Okay. So on environmental issues, I think I need to at least mention someone else who is an expert. I'm certainly not an expert on this sort of issue, but Alex Epstein, he is a specialist in this area. He deals with energy and environmental issues. He's written two books, including a New York Times bestseller, I think, called The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels. His most recent book is called Fossil Future, and I would recommend that resource. He's also got a Substack and a website called energytalkingpoints.com, which I would recommend. So on this particular issue of CFCs, I don't have the knowledge to say much on it, but I guess I can say in general, I'm very suspicious of a lot of the claims that are made. Just like I mentioned, I'm suspicious about claims about the history of capitalism because I think there's a lot of mythology about it. I think that's also true about claims about the environment. So I don't know if these are legitimate claims or not, but it's something I would want to research and investigate before just taking them at face value.
Okay,
There's been lots
here's
of
one last
doomsday
thing too.
claims, like the world is going to end, and the environmentalists have been saying this for like decades, and they catastrophize things. And I think it's plausibly a way of getting control because if they convince people, if they scare people, if they scaremonger, then people are more likely to agree to government regulations because if there's an emergency and we got to do something. But if things aren't that bad, then there really is no justification for the regulations. And I think that is likely what's going on, at least in many of these cases.
Okay, do you know about Love Canal and the establishment of Superfund sites?
No.
So in Niagara, New York, there was this chemical company that buried like 21 tons of toxic materials beneath a neighborhood, and it caused contamination and miscarriages and birth defects and cancers. And then President Carter, through Congress, helped establish what are known as super funds, which basically provide retroactive liability. So you can sue the corporation that dumped the chemicals into the neighborhood that killed or that maimed the population. And it also sets up regulations. So they did this. The Hudson in New York used to be a Superfund site because General Electric, for like a 20-year period, would dump PCBs into the water, which are endocrine disruptors.
Okay, well, I think this is a reason for having property rights, which I think you mentioned. So if you have property rights over the land or the rivers, and then someone pollutes your section of the land or the river or whoever owns that section, then you can take that person to court, as you mentioned, and you can sue that person. And I think that's the way to deal with it. And then you're just protecting your property rights, which I wouldn't consider a regulation. I think I call it a regulation when the government is initiating force to get someone to do something, like minimum wage laws. You're forcing people to pay a certain amount or accept a certain amount. But in this case, I would consider the government stepping in. If they're just stepping in to defend property rights, I would consider that retaliatory force, not initiating force. Because if you have a system of rights set up and it's such that, someone owns a certain section of the river and then someone else comes in and pollutes that, well, then they're polluting that part of the river without the consent, without the voluntary consent of the person who owns it. And so they're forcing themselves in a sense on that person. And then using retaliatory force to stop that person would be it would be retaliatory force, not initiation of force. And that is, in retaliatory force is consistent with the sorts of laws that I advocate. But they're not, I wouldn't call them regulations, just proper
Yeah, but now
laws.
there are regulations in place where these private companies can't leach these chemicals into rivers or wetlands or underground. And it's a direct result of the Superfund sites.
Well, I think maybe what should happen is instead of having regulations, they should just sell off the land. I don't think there should be government land. It should be privatized, at least the vast majority of land, maybe some government buildings, maybe that would be considered public land, or maybe they could just lease that land from some private landholder. I'm not sure exactly how it should work, but in any case, I think the vast majority of land, at least, should not be public. It should be privatized, and then a system of property rights should be uh, applicable to all of those lands. And then in that case, any laws would just be laws. They wouldn't be regulations. They would just, because they wouldn't be initiating force. They would just be using retaliatory force to stop any violations of whatever rights people have over those lands.
All right, I think we're going to disagree on this, but the next time, let's talk about science funding.
Science fund. Okay, before you go, I'm just curious to know a little more about you, if you don't mind. Like you said, you heard about me on the Majority Report. Do you know, like, roughly how long ago was that?
So the call was probably like 3 or 4 years ago, but it came up on my algorithm. I mean, I like it because I completely disagree with you, but I always like to have a conversation with people I disagree with.
So when did you first
And I'm
hear
sure
that
you feel the
call?
same. I mean, I've been a Majority Report listener for a while, so it just comes up on my feed. So like when I first started messaging you is probably when I saw the clip.
Okay, so maybe a couple months or so ago.
Hmm.
Okay, and um, do you want to introduce yourself at all? Just like say anything about what you do. You don't have to. You can be, but I'm just
Yeah.
curious. Like,
Yeah,
are you in
Darwin's
school,
Darwin's
or
not
you
my real
work,
name, but
or what?
yeah, I'm in the last year of my PhD in biology. I don't
Oh,
want to say
okay.
where, but
Sure, sure.
yeah.
PhD in biology. Okay. And I guess when did you start getting interested in the Majority Report, or the leftist political philosophy?
Yeah, it was around COVID because I I went on strike with a bunch of my student fellow workers, so I wanted to know a bit more about labor organization.
Okay. All right, interesting. Well, thanks for that, and I definitely appreciate the call. And feel free to call some another time, and we can talk about public funding of science.
All right. Cheers.
All right, take care. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Okay, that was good. And I see somebody else has entered the waiting room. Someone who I do not recognize, Matt T. So I'm going to have to screen that call either through Zoom or YouTube or my separate call screening number, or maybe all of the above. Um, but got to take a little break here, catch my breath, maybe take a sip of water before I'm ready to take another call. Let me come back to the YouTube chat, see what's been going on in there. Okay, here we are. Oh, Mark Thomas. Maybe that's Mark. Oh, I see. He joined under his usual default name, right? Because he has a different screen name for YouTube and for Zoom. All right, so let me see if I can catch up a little bit here on the YouTube chat. Get a sip of water. See some new people in the chat. XYZ Zush. Zush. Yeah, he was the one who I read a little bit from last time. Not sure if he's still here. Looks like his last chat was about 24 minutes ago. Um, okay, so Zush says egoism and capitalism for the entire world. Yes, that's what I would like. But of course, what exactly egoism and capitalism means, that could be a big discussion. Ayn Rand, whose philosophy I promote, excuse me, she has a distinctive view of egoism. It means doing what is best for yourself while also respecting the rights of others to do the same. It involves not initiating force against other people, and it involves various virtues: rationality, independence, integrity, honesty, productiveness, pride, justice. And then capitalism is a system in which all the government does is basically there are three functions: police, military, and courts. But that's a very different sort of system than we have today, where the government intervenes massively through trillion or billion-dollar programs like Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, public education, public roads, and it has all these regulatory agencies: FDA, SEC, FAA, FCC, etc. All that would be gone in a capitalist world, as I understand it. There could be private rating agencies, but not government regulatory agencies. Uh, okay. Oh yeah, he said to call him Marx. Forgot it's an easier name for him. Okay, but I don't see him anymore in the chat, so I don't know if he's still here. And then we have Tay ZK, who says, "How could you say something so controversial yet so brave?" Well, I say what I think is true, and let the chips fall where they may. Whether people all agree with it or not, All right. Here's another person with a username that I don't think I'm going to read because it's looks unpleasant. Then Godzilla says, "Hey Dan, hi Godzilla. I remember you. You were here in a recent stream." And then after that, looks like that's where Mark starts. He says, "Hi Dan, would like to join the room." Okay. And then another person, La Ego, asks, "What is my position on the morality of abortion?" I am in favor of abortion being legal. I think people should be able to have an abortion, and I don't think embryos or fetuses have rights, and that's what I call them before they are born. I don't call them babies or children. If you're speaking in a loose sense, you'd say you could call it that. You know, my child is, I'm going to have a child or I'm going to have a baby. But I think if we want to be more strict with language, which I think is important on certain issues, I don't call it a baby or a child until it's born. I think that's the point at which it comes to have rights. I don't think you have rights if you're just living on the inside of somebody else. I think the point of rights is to protect individual human beings, and you're not an individual if you are attached to the inside of someone else's body. Um, you become an individual when you are individuated, which means physically separate from the mother. Just having unique DNA, I don't think suffices um, for being an individual in the sense that's relevant for rights. As I said, I think rights are meant to protect individual human beings. So if you don't count yet as an individual human being, and I don't think you count when you're still in the womb, then I don't think you have rights. So I think abortion can be perfectly moral. In any case, it does not violate any rights of the growing embryo or fetus because it doesn't have rights, in my view. Okay. And then we have some more from Mark Thomas. Who will think of the rivers? How come nobody asked the rivers whether they can sense? Um, okay. So maybe this is a good time to take Mark's call. Yeah. Who shows up as Matt T on Zoom, but he goes by Mark in YouTube. So I'll get to his call in just a second. I'll just take a sip of water. All right, now let's see what happens this time. So I have everything unchecked. So I think he should not be able to start video or audio until I ask him to or let him. So let's see if that happens. So he used the web link instead of calling in on a phone like Darwin. So I think it might behave a little differently this time, but let's see. All right, I just hit admit, and yes, it does look different this time. So now it gives me an option to, it says ask to unmute, whereas for Darwin, it did not say that. He just automatically came in with his phone unmuted. So I guess that's a difference between calling in on phone and dialing on phone and using the web link. I have to hit ask to unmute. All right, so I'm going to hit ask to unmute. Oh, Mark says he just sent me a chat in Zoom. It says I'm in. Thanks for the welcome. Yeah, once I admit you to Zoom, you can then start using the chat in Zoom. That was another thing I realized a day or two ago. If I haven't admitted you to the waiting room, you can see a chat from me to you, but you can't reply to that chat and start chatting yourself. Um, oh, Mark says he chatted that he can't see the unmute button yet. Yeah, I haven't hit it yet. I was just talking a little more. Just I wanted to explain this before I hit the ask the unmute button. All right, I just hit it now, so now you should be able to unmute.
And it works. Glad to be back, Dan. How's your Saturday going?
Hey, going pretty well. How was yours?
Busy, as it unfortunately for me is. I said I work weekends, and so it pays, but it does kind of get in the way of doing fun stuff like reading or vacation or discussing the work of objectivism. But
Hmm.
that's life. So I wanted to ask a little about um, one of your previous caller who apparently he was making something about environmentalism or something. I just dipped in a few minutes ago, but I want to ask your thoughts on like kind of um, how kind of the origins of a lot of this like kind of environmental like thought and like whether any of it has any um rational ethics can be like derived from oist epistemology regarding the environment, or whether and how to kind of avoid the extreme of either um, nature worship motivated by not Rand said it was just one thing, but many many weird ideologies, and on the other hand, kind of the cronyist um, impulse to essentially just disregard, um, reduce everything to something that seems to be, I guess, what the lefties call the profit motive, like just use do do economic activity despite, or political activity as we do in modern states, despite any negative externalities that might come about, such as polluted rivers and stuff like that. Um, and so we can start with that, but I do have some to share. I know I promised to kind of reach out regarding a show host. Apparently they went cold, but we can keep in touch privately regarding that. And also, there was something about a few weeks ago we were discussing like the religious impulses behind the left, and there was a Marxist philosopher, French Marxist philosopher Louis Althusser, who had like kind of these weird, crazy theories on why Marxists should copy religion more. Which, as we're seeing, we have some people are implementing that. As perhaps recent example, one of the embassy killer that did his stuff a few days ago. So unfortunately, that's happening. But let's start with environmentalism,
Okay.
and whether there's
So
anything rational. There are rational ways to go about it from proper principles as opposed to improper ones.
yeah. Okay. So again, I'll mention Alex Epstein as the best source I know of on environmental issues or energy issues. So if anyone really wants to get into this deeply, that's the source I would recommend. But let me see if I can say a bit about it. Um, I do think that, well, so one thing that Alex talks about is a human centric framework as opposed to a Earth centric framework. Or I'm not sure if he puts it that way, but a lot of people are concerned about the Earth as an end in itself, as opposed to um, its role in benefiting human life. So we can try to make the planet better for human beings, or we can try to rid the planet of any influence of human beings and have it. There's a slogan that some environmentalists used from, I don't know if it was the 70s or 80s, but the slogan was "Back to the Pleistocene." So I think that was an ice age before humans. Well, maybe there were humans, but they just were like cavemen, cave women. They hadn't industrialized or impacted the planet much. So if you want to say go back to the Pleistocene, that's a way of saying, well, industrialization and human impact on the planet is a bad thing. We want to eliminate human impact. But I think that's a very anti-human view. And why would you hold that? Why is it better to go back to such a state? I mean, if you're a egoist, that's a deeper issue. You know, what kind of ethics should you hold? If you're an egoist, you want to do what's best for yourself and whatever makes your own life the happiness, then I think that entails not going back to the Pleistocene. I think you can live a much better, happier life in an industrialized society where you have control over nature. You have air conditioning, you have dams to control the water. So if you're having floods, you can hold the dam back. If you're having a drought, you can let some water through. But that's a way of impacting nature for the benefit of human beings. But if your standard is not human well-being, if you think nature as in meaning excluding human beings, I don't know why you would want to exclude human beings. You might think that's a biased kind of view of doing something that's good for nature, if that means um, like aren't human beings part of nature? Um, but I think a lot of people have that sort of viewpoint. They're concerned with uh, the earth as it exists apart from human beings, and they're really anti-human. Um, so I think that's a bad ethical kind of perspective. It's an anti-egoist perspective, and I think that's at the root of the environmentalist movement, or at least a large part of it. And you really have to. I think if you don't uproot that anti-human, self-sacrificial kind of morality and replace it with an egoistic morality, then you're still going to be susceptible to movements like environmentalism, some parts of which want to take us back to the Pleistocene and rid the earth of all human impact. So now there are, I think, a lot of people who are maybe not the leaders of the environmental movement. They're more of followers who have been duped by the leaders on the grounds of, oh, it's just a movement about trying to get clean air and clean water. That's really all it's about. Now, I think those are legitimate concerns, but that is if you're pro-human. Like if you're an egoist, you certainly want to have clean water to drink or swim in, and you want to have clean air to breathe. But that's a very different attitude than these back to the Pleistocene sort of environmentalists. So I think some of the dynamic of what's going on is you have a hardcore sort of leader of the environmentalist movement, which is just anti-human, anti-industrialization, but then they put on this mask to make it more palatable to the general public who doesn't want to go back to the Pleistocene and be cavemen. And they put on this mask and say, "Oh, we just want clean air and clean water," where there's the real agenda is much more radical, but they just use the more plausible sorts of calls for clean air and clean water as bait to kind of hook people in, and then they go somewhere else with it. So there's, I guess there's a lot. You raised a lot of other topics too, but maybe I'll just pause there. Do you want to jump in at this point and reply to any of that, or do you want me to go on to talk about some of your other issues that you raised? I don't know if you're still there. Oh, you're muted right now. Oh, maybe I have to hit ask to unmute again. Okay, let me hit ask to unmute. All right. You should be able to unmute yourself now. I'll hit it again.
Got it. It works now. Can you hear me?
Okay, yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah. So, what did you ask just previously?
Oh, I just wanted to see if you wanted to jump in and reply to anything I just said, or did you want me, should I just go on to address some of the other issues you raised?
I could just want to, we could go ahead and move on. I just want to ask, like, kind of offer a few clarifying points, mainly on like the human some clarifying points and a question or two, like mainly on the human like ethos behind some of the environmental movements allegedly, and whether there are any like notable examples of the same. Because I would argue that many of the existing environmental movements do in fact have some pro-human um, ethos to them, as well as being pro-environment. It's just that they're rather mixed, like kind of like as before, like kind of a mixture of these like impulses do in part to kind of how they came about. Like as he mentioned, the previous call had mentioned, um, like just horrible industrial abuses from or maybe it's I guess according to our ethics probably um overboard to call them, well, abuses, so to speak, about of like workers and the environment that were just unchecked um before these regulations came about. um and so it may not be like when you're talking of someone who is like kind of anti-human to the point, I would say that it would be improper to frame all of them as like directly anti-human, but some of the results of some of the thinking obviously do lead or can lead to anti-human ends. And because there are many different impulses, like let's say religion, um, rationalism, uh, at least that we're talking of the kind of the vanilla environmentalism as opposed to, let's say, Ann Prim's. Uh, it's hard to. It may be hard for even these for us or even these figures to see just where the anti-human thought begins and um where valid concerns are. And what I would say, like perhaps there's a need to kind of look into these things more and help people identify. Um, but I guess to my question, what are your thoughts on like kind of the fact that isn't they aren't all anti-human via their kind of ethos, but they're more mixed. And then regarding if you know any examples of like explicitly anti-human um environmentalists or other near, which I can think of a few, like particularly some in the so-called vegan movements, some of the so-called animal rights movements. Again, um, their skew is that they extend like kind of negative rights to like animals as their the virtue of being sentient creatures, and they believe that we should not like enslave or coerce animals for the purpose of food or labor, the way that modern industrial society has been. And though that from our perspective is would very much be an anti-human view, but it isn't that would be perhaps the example among others. Among others, like there's some like I will do answer, but like some like genuine apocalypse cults that believe that human existence is evil and have in fact been able to kind of mix in among these movements. And so when people say anti-human, sometimes it's taken by those outside negative right architecture as like a canard, like we are just accusing them of being anti-human because we believe in something different. But um, as it stands, there are in fact some really genuinely like misanthropic anti-human movements that have kind of come that are like basically under the radar. But with all that said, what are your thoughts?
I was just looking at Google. I Googled Earth first back to the Pleistocene because
Yeah, oh,
I
yeah,
think
there's
that was the name of the organization that had that slogan. And I was just trying to verify that. I think it was Earth first. That maybe I can read a little bit from the oh, so here's an article from the New York Times. I'm just looking at the Google hit. I haven't clicked. I don't have a subscription, so I can't. I don't think I can read the whole article. But just the little brief intro that shows up when on a Google search shows an article from the New York Times, and it says July 29th, 1990, and it starts. Indeed, one of the slogans of Earth First is back to the Pleistocene. So I guess that group is the one I was thinking of. So if you're looking for particular examples of people, well, that's I mean that's an organization, but um, whatever people are involved with that organization, those would be people who hold this anti-human view, which I think is very radical. I think a lot of people who are pro-environmentalism or who might call themselves pro-environment wouldn't necessarily sign on to that themselves. Um, they're more concerned with things
you
like
don't
clean
have
air,
that.
clean water. But I guess this is just some proof that some people actually are concerned with getting rid of human impact, and I think could justifiably be called anti-human. As for like where this started, I mean an anti-self or self-sacrificial kind of view is millennia old. I mean, it's part of Christianity, I think. Jesus sacrificing himself on the cross, and someone like Mother Teresa, she embodies a self-sacrificing kind of morality.
Well,
So
self-sacrifice, sacrificial ethics exists outside the West, of course. So
yeah,
it's kind of older than it's as old as humanity. To be honest, like all across the West, you see even as far as like ancient Greece and Rome, and as or even a place like think of Confucianism, most definitely, and systems descended from it. Um, uh, Vedic religions or the Indic family of religions, and where there that's kind of a huge thing, with some caveats, of course.
I think
So
Greece was relatively egoistic,
yes,
and Rome they were relatively secular compared to preceding and succeeding civilizations. So the Dark Ages or the Middle Ages, I think, was a step back in terms of I think it was back to a more self-sacrificial sort of worldview, whereas the Greeks were more about enjoying life on Earth, um, achieving happiness. I think Aristotle maybe is the best representative of an egoistic sort of ethics. But yeah, it's definitely much older. This self-sacrificial view is much older than Christianity. I think there are more ancient religions. Um, but in any case, I think like in the 20th century, there was Marxism
of
and
course.
communism became major forces. You had the first communist state, the Soviet Union, starting in 1917,
So the Paris
and
communes, you forget the Paris communes. They it happened several decades earlier in Paris.
well, I mean, like
It didn't survive.
the first
It
state
didn't
that was like
survive.
an enduring nation based on communism.
Okay,
I don't know how long the Paris Commune lasted, but at least in some of my
very short.
reading,
And no
um,
one recognized them, and the monarchy thankfully crushed them.
okay, yeah, I don't know much about it, but I think in the 20th century, communism became more of a force. It took over, a large part of the world, and it was a failure. I mean, it was, millions of people die due
Mm.
to famines, and people are just killed through purges. They're just murdered, And I
But
think
they are
it
still
was,
existing states. I'm not to scan for that, but they are still existing states that are
oh yeah,
helped by and
like
it's
North
kind of
Korea.
one thing that just to spoil the next topic a little bit is that
Well, hold on, hold on,
these
hold on.
so-called
Before we go to the next topic, let me just say a little more
God,
about this one. So, I think, yeah, there still are some communist states, or at least quasi states you might call communist, like North Korea. But it's much less of a force than it used to be. I think 20th century would be the heyday of communist states. But I think it was widely recognized that communism was a failure, and you had the fall of the Soviet Union, and in like 1991, Soviet Union ended, and you had the fall of the Berlin Wall. Um, I think that was 1989, the fall of the Eastern Bloc, and uh, the I think the left was looking for another sort of cause they could rally behind. This is an explanation I've heard given by Ayn Rand. She has a book called The Anti-Industrial Revolution. The title is The New Left, and then the subtitle is The Anti-Industrial Revolution. And I think the difference there is the old left, they were pro-industrial, um, but then eventually they realize, well, leftist philosophy is like communism is a failure. So we either have to embrace that failure, um, or we have to find something else. So I think what happened is they gave up on communism, and then they started promoting environmentalism as their next big agenda, and starting in the 60s, or around that period. Um, I think is when environmentalism started to become a significant movement. And I think it was in the Nixon administration that he started the EPA, and in 1969, I believe, and then you started to get things like the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act. But I think there was a kind of transition and focus away from communism, and then more towards environmentalism in the 60s. That became much more of a rallying point. But what's common to them is they're both self-sacrificial. I think in communism, the individual is sacrificed to the state. And in environmentalism, the individual is sacrificed to the planet. But the the commonality is they both are encouraging self-sacrifice of the individual. So that root morality, the self-sacrificial morality, is the common thread, and it's ancient, right? It goes back to the millennia, to the Middle Ages, to pre-Greek civilization. So I do think it's primarily at root an ethical phenomenon, but it's just taken on different guises over the decades. Um, but I'll pause there. You said you had another topic you wanted to go to.
yeah,
Oh, maybe, yeah, go ahead.
yeah. So thanks again though for expounding on those the previous one. I greatly appreciate it. So
Sure.
my next topic is a little more about it's a little related to, well, not really per se, because we here in the United States we have a holiday coming up. It's Memorial Day, which is um, sacrifice to honor the kind of ironic, but honor military personnel who died, particularly those in oh, did the sound almost died. Sorry about that.
Uh,
But
oh, no problem. I still hear you.
got it. But I think I may have some details in the chat, but this year essentially represents the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution. So it's kind of and obviously there's a whole bunch of stuff done planned to celebrate that. And Rand talked very positively of the American Revolution because it represented the next political state inspired by negative rights and Enlightenment thinking. However, um, what
I got some audio problems here. I oh, for some reason you got muted. Okay, let me hit us to unmute again.
got it? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Got thanks. So I think where was I was in the middle of explaining how it seems that the modern American Republic has um, veered from that greatly, and whether you want to blame the left or the right from that, there's rational argument to blame both. Even though from my perspective, I blame the left much more. Um, it's it seems that America has, or Rand said that America, even in her time, was kind of deviating from that ideal. Um, and so I wanted to ask your thoughts on um, what should be done to, like, basically what can be done to help, not per se to kind of promote, kind of remind people of that ideal, but rather to um, educate um, free-minded people and others receptive about the importance of negative rights and in helping kind of blossom a helping them kind of see the flaws in like kind of in modern statescraft, especially in how state entities are basically given so-called given privileges to violence. I don't even want to call them rights, but essentially privileges to violence against other human beings, or against human beings in particular. And um, the reason I included some mention of America is that although it was genuinely a step in the right direction, obviously there were still issues. Were still like issues of like not everyone was politically enfranchised. It was still to landholders, and obviously the left will complain, oh, slavery and stuff like that. But um, it was still coming out of an authoritarian, a very authoritarian monarchist royalist pre-enlightenment tradition of like um, the state or the king or the collective, or the in some cases the nobility having um, privileges to violence against the common people. And so, as in one direction, that uh, through the American Revolution, we have something that gave rise to like an expression of classical liberalism in the political sphere, an American republic, if it can be kept, with limited powers and with an like kind of a non-interventionist foreign policy, at least as much as they tried back then. And in the other direction, the other direction gave us the left to kind of not pussyfoot around. Although there are kind of others that, and the reason was kind of for the similar grievance that the normal people um, were forced, were tired of, or rather, not necessarily normal people, of certain intellectuals were, which is kind of one of the thing with the left. They were tired of the privileges of these elites and decided to kind of foment first um, revolutionary thought among kind of the middle classes and upper class, and then inspiring things such as the French Revolution, the Carbonari revolts, the
Okay, let me jump in,
yeah,
and maybe we can. I think I'm going to want to go back to the chat after this.
sure.
So,
But essentially, how should we like kind of teach people with that backdrop? How should we help blossom like a new political science that has rights as its center, especially amidst the statism and the fact that at times it seems that like no one's listening. So that others, even though they recognize many people rather turn to leftism or other paths when really they need to. The thing is to learn negative rights and unlearn statism among other behaviors,
Okay.
or among other bad systems of harmful systems of thought.
Yeah, so I think what is needed is Ayn Rand's philosophy, in particular her ethics of egoism and being opposed to self-sacrifice. Short of that, I don't think there's any way to get a good political system in place, because I think capitalism is essentially it's a system geared to benefiting yourself of happiness. So it's mentioned in the Declaration of Independence. This country is founded on the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But happiness is a very selfish or self-interested or egoist kind of thing.
As we understand
So
it.
as long as you are upholding a anti-self morality, a self-sacrificial morality, an altruistic morality, which almost everyone upholds today, at least to some extent, then it's gonna constantly be in tension with a system geared to enabling individuals to benefit themselves, to pursue their own happiness. So you really got to uproot that anti-self, altruistic kind of morality, and I think Ayn Rand is the best force for doing that. And I'm trying to spread her ideas here on this channel. But I think that is really the key. I mean, there
Here's
are
to it.
deeper issues like in epistemology, upholding the efficacy of reason. Um, but that's super important. But and maybe I can talk about. I have talked about that some more. I think on other podcasts. But anyways, I'll just mention the ethical aspect. That's certainly a big part of what needs to be done to uphold. Well, you're using this term negative rights. So for anyone who's not familiar with that idea, it's just that you can't do one thing in particular, which is initiate force against others, or you don't have a right to anything. People who talk about positive rights think you have rights to it, like a job or an education or a vacation or a medical care. There are certain positive goods or services people you think you have a right to, but on so-called negative rights, you don't have a right to these goods or services. You just have a right to be free from coercion. No one can do this thing to you. They can't initiate force. But I think you could look at that in a more positive way and say, well, now I'm free to do what I want. It's this positive. I can now act on my judgment. I'm not prevented from doing that. So you could take a positive perspective on it. Now I'm able to do stuff I wasn't able to do before, or I can use my wealth in ways that I wasn't able to before because the government was taxing it away. But now I can keep my wealth that I've earned at a job. It doesn't get taken out through Social Security taxes or Medicare taxes, and I can spend it on what I want. Um, but
Here,
yeah,
here.
that's part of the capitalist system that Ayn Rand advocates of freedom and voluntary association. You can do as you choose as long as you're not initiating force against others. So I'm going to leave it there. Just one other thing. You mentioned some group that you were going to put me in touch with. If you could like email me or somehow send me a link to that group, and
Sure.
I think I somehow lost track of what was going on with that. But if you email me that, that'll help me keep track of it, and maybe I can get in touch with those people
Sure.
and do.
I have your contact info. I will get that to you. Are we almost about to end the show?
I'm not sure how much time I'm going to go on. It's been about an hour and a half. I usually go for around 2 hours, but I do want to go back to the chat, see if I want to have any replies there. Was there anything else you wanted to say before we end this call?
Just one other thing, like basically on kind of which segues off, but regarding the like kind of the state, like state, your mention that no one else was doing that. When like for me, as I may have mentioned before, I come from kind of the kind of libertarian world, so to speak. For me, I was whichever of the Libertarian Party of my former state, and so there is a whole lot kind of going on in that regard to kind of um, like on the groundwork, just spreading libertarian ideology. Obviously, it's different from objectivism in many ways, but it the issue is that I think you had mentioned that introducing egoism is rational egoism is a way to kind of break the collectivism, but there is the issue that other human beings still see that they have the right to use force against others, and that things such as states, groups, and other things have these rights as well. And it it would really take the kind of opting out of those systems to remedy that, and um, hence why I mentioned kind of the need for like kind of a new, like almost new political science, which not to too long, but libertarianism has for the past um, 60 odd years been that political science that kind of based thoroughly on negative rights. And I think there should be more cooperation between liberty minded people to kind of educate others and kind of challenge some of this kind of social overreach. But um, what would you say? What kind of? I guess I'll leave this as the kind of final question. What are your thoughts on kind of the coercive nature of like kind of statescraft itself and how it kind of evolved from the kind of positive right that the positive rights have been kind of assumed for millennia, and that's only since the Enlightenment that we've been able to start pushing back. And like, because right now, international law, there's still based on this, like kind of the privilege to use force against people who can't fight back, and or who could, but who would get in trouble because of laws and quote unquote. And I do know that there is like an objectivist law association, which is one among others, like kind of um, working on who they've been around for a while, but they in case any of the audience, you go feel free to Google them and see what they're about. But yeah, I'm out of steam. My apologies.
Okay. All right. I'll say some of those after. I'll just end this call and then I'll say a few words on that. But thanks for calling in, Mark. Appreciate it.
On to be here.
Okay. Bye bye. All right. So there goes Mark. Nice to get two calls on a stream. So the like, what can we do to implement better laws? He mentioned Objectivist Law Association. I think there's something called the Association for Objective Law. Maybe that was what he was referring to. But there's some group of objectivists or people somehow affiliated with Objectivism, which started this organization to promote better laws. And I don't know much about it, but there's also other organizations like the Ayn Rand Institutes who are promoting Ayn Rand's philosophy, which I think is essentially what needs to be done to get a better political system. Um, as for libertarianism, which you mentioned, I try to distance myself from that label because it's so often associated with people who hold views that are uh, hostile to minds and even hostile to liberty, I would say. At least many of them, because I think many libertarians are anarchists, Murray Rothbard being one, or they try to somehow combine anarchism with capitalism and they call themselves anarcho-capitalists. I don't think that's a thing. I've discussed this a little bit, at least in previous calls or previous shows. and also the foreign policy, I think, of many people who are libertarians, I think, is anti-United States or anti-Israel, maybe. Um, but there's been uh, articles written in the past. In particular, I think Peter Schwartz, he has done a lot of research on the libertarian movements, um, and exposed some of the problems in it, or at least the differences between the sort of um, policies it upholds and then what objectivism advocates. Now, there could be some people who call themselves libertarians who don't accept anarchy or anarcho-capitalism, who have a sort of view that is more compatible with objectivism. But I'm just a little wary of that label libertarian because I think it has been used in very different ways, often in ways that are very inimical to the ideas of objectivism. So that's a reason, at least one reason, I don't use that label. But there might be uh, people that I think are good in the libertarian movements, but I think it's important not to just take that label. You really have to investigate what it stands for. You can't just take it as necessarily meaning someone is in favor of a capitalist system um, of the sort that Ayn Rand advocates. You have to dig into it a little more and find out what someone really means by that. And if someone is pro-anarchy, then I don't think it is a good idea to join forces, ally yourself for that with those people. If you're a friend of liberty and you want to promote the cause of liberty, I think that's undermining your cause, to associate with that kind of crowd. Um, so if you want to promote capitalism as Ayn Rand understands that, um, then yeah, just be careful. Uh, be careful who you associate with. That's one thing, and uh, a label is not always the enough to know what you're associating with. You might have to look into it some more. But okay, I think I'll just leave it there on that topic and go back to the chat, see what else is new there. Thanks for coming by the stream. If you're new here, welcome. This is a show where I promote Ayn Rand's ideas. Ayn Rand was a philosopher and a novelist, author of Atlas Shrugged and the Fountainhead, who developed a philosophy called Objectivism, which stands for reason, egoism, and capitalism. Okay, thanks for the likes that have come in. Thanks for any new subscriptions. Let's see, we got Matthew Stroud in the chat. It looks like you might be a new chatter. You say you can be anti-statism without being anti-state. Yeah, that's right. So I would say objectivism is anti-statism, but it's not anti-states. If you're anti-states, then that would be, or anti-governments, that would be, it's often an anarchist position. Um, or they might talk about competing governments or competing states instead of having one institution with a monopoly on the use of physical force. But Ayn Rand was certainly not not in favor of anarchy. She was very opposed to that. Um, she thought government was not a necessary evil; it was a necessary good. But it needs to be properly constrained to be a good force. It should not uh, initiate force on people by taxing them, for instance, or regulating them. It should leave them free to act as they choose, to act on their own judgment, as long as they're not initiating force against others. So that would be a good sort of state, one that protects people's rights to do that. Okay, so it looks like there's, in the rest of the chat, there's chats from Mark and from Darwin. I'm up to 2:02 p.m. Pacific time in the chat. There's one from Darwin. He says, wanting to reform Love Canal, PCBs in the Hudson, Superfund sites and holes in the ozone is not environmental worship, complete straw man. So I'm not saying every concern people have who call themselves environmentalists is some irrational kind of worship of the environment. I think some people have legitimate concerns about clean air, clean water, and for that, I think there are mechanisms that could be used, like property rights, to protect those legitimate concerns. But I do think there is another segment of environmentalists, like the Earth First, back to the Pleistocene people, which I think is the environmental worship, Mother Nature, Gaia sort of worship. That's what I'm talking about. So I think the issue is there's kind of a package deal here, and under the heading of environmentalism are both pro-human legitimate concerns and anti-human illegitimate concerns, I would say. But those need to be distinguished, and I think it's there might be something of a bait and switch going on with the general public. They're presented a certain view of the legitimate aspects, but then I think some people try to hijack their legitimate concerns and then put it to more nefarious ends, and which are the sort of back to the Pleistocene ends that some people promote. Um, okay, some more from Mark. Rationalism themselves. Darwin says, you said my ideas were weird, lefty, and environment worship. I don't think I said that about your ideas. Maybe I don't know if you're replying to me or to Mark or somebody else. I was saying there some people have legitimate concerns about the environment, but I think they are part of there are other people who are concerned about the environment that don't have those kinds of concerns. Um, oh, Darwin just says that was in response to Mark. Okay. Um, and okay, just okay. So yeah, I'm definitely in favor of having a nice environment. I think that's part of I think a capitalist system helps with that because people that's good for individuals. I want to live in a clean environment, and I think places where there are not good property rights in place, maybe like the Soviet Union, I've heard that, or China, there's really bad pollution. But maybe if things were more privatized, they would be able to clean it up because you would be able to take people to court if they're spewing pollution into your water or your air, so you can't breathe. I think property rights instead of property rights could help with that. Okay. All right. Well, I think we're coming up on 2 hours, and we covered some good material today. And I don't see anybody else in the waiting room right now, so maybe this is a good time to end the stream. All right. Well, I think I'm going to do that. So thanks everyone for coming by. Um, I I definitely appreciate any likes on the stream and any new subscribers. Thank you for subscribing. I just got one new person came in the chat. Let me take a quick look at that. He says Chuck Woo Igwe says the green energy agenda is just a political agenda to prevent the developing world from using the energy necessary to industrialize. Okay. I think Alex Epstein has talked some about that. he's also referred to a I don't know if it's the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, or something else, but some piece of legislation has been called the Green New Scam. And I think not just by Alex, I don't know who originated that term, but I do think it's plausible that a lot of the green efforts are more fundamentally a political movement, and I think there's a lot of pseudoscience in the green movements. But look to someone like Alex for more details on that. Um, and I think even more deeply, I think it's plausibly an ethical movement, which is fueled by this self-sacrificial morality, which has been around for centuries, even millennia, but has taken different forms. Communism being one form, and I think environmentalism being another, at least in certain facets of the environmentalists, like this Earth First, back to the Pleistocene movement. It's not a human first; it's a Earth First. So you could see that as a anti-human, self-sacrificial kind of moral movement. But I think what we need is a pro-human, pro-happiness, egoistic, individualistic kind of movement. Okay, thanks everyone for coming by, and I will stream again on Wednesday around this time. That's my plan. So until then, have a good next few days. All right, bye everyone.